Okay, so this is going to be my recap of Anne with an E, Season 1, Episode 1, Your Will Shall Decide Your Destiny. So Marilla and Matthew have decided to adopt a boy from one of the asylums because they are both getting up in age. They own a farm. Matthew has some health problems, and so they need more help around the farm. Now, obviously, conversations, a conversation can arise about them adopting a child solely for their labor, but this is where we are. And so, and even Marilla ends up saying is the boy has to be obedient and hardworking, which is kind of like, okay.
With any luck, Mrs. Spencer will have picked out a good one. Hard worker and obedient like we asked for.
So, Matthew was leaving to go to the train station to pick the boy up. And so, Rachel, who is Marilla's friend, they've been friends since grade school. She's the town busybody and the town gossip. And so she sees Matthew hurrying on, and of course she has to find out what's going on. So she rushes over to their home, and initially Marilla wasn't going to tell her, but then she ends up telling her that, they've decided to adopt a boy from the asylum.
We're adopting a boy from the orphan asylum in Nova Scotia, and he's arriving today.
And Rachel, she wasn't happy about that. She thought, feel that they're making a huge mistake. And of course, she had a story about a family that adopted a boy that almost burned their house down and da-da-da-da.
I was reading in the paper how a man and his wife up west of the island took an orphan boy out of the asylum and he set fire to their home.
And basically, she's against the whole thing. Okay, so now we flash to Anne and Mrs. Spencer. Mrs. Spencer is accompanying Anne. She went to get Anne, and she's taking her to the Cuthberts, which is Marilla and Matthew. And so there's a baby on the train crying, and you see Anne ends up having a flashback of the time she spent in someone's home. They had a bunch of kids, and she was severely abused. And throughout the series, you see that she has had some horror stories. And so, Matthew is now at the station, and he actually passed her on his way in. And so he was talking to the man behind the counter, and it basically said that Mr. Spencer told me that, the boy was supposed to arrive today. And the guy behind the counter basically said that the young girl that's out there is who arrived with Mrs. Spencer, and she left her here and basically told me to wait until you came to pick her up. And so the guy, he's locking up because he's trying to go home.
Mrs. Spencer was to bring him over from the asylum for us.
Well, Mrs. Spencer got off the train with that strange snippet. Gave her into my charge, said you'll be along for her presently.
And so, of course, Matthew didn't have a choice but to take her. And so, she's very talkative, which he finds out. I mean, she talked his ear off the entire time, but he didn't seem to mind. So they get to the house, and of course, Marilla comes out, and Marilla's like, well, who is this? Where's the boy?
Matthew Cuthbert? Who's that? Where is the boy?
And he basically said that this is who Mrs. Spencer brought. And of course, she was, he basically said that, I couldn't leave her there. She's a young girl. Like, I couldn't just, walk away and leave her there.
She couldn't be left there, no matter where the mistake could come in.
And she ends up saying that she has to go back. Like, she's like an animal, a dog. Like, her... Marilla's initial approach to Anne was quite nasty. And of course, Anne is upset, and she's like, well, you're not, you don't want me. I should have known.
She's got to go back.
You don't want me. I should have expected it.
And so, of course, Anne is upset, and Matthew was saying, well, she's traveled a long distance to be, disappointed. And Marilla's response is, well, you should have never brought her home to begin with.
Well, she shouldn't be here. You should never have brought her home.
And so, they go into the house, and, Anne is trying to make her case that she could, help him around the farm. Like, she's strong, she's young and strong, and she could do it.
Fiddlesticks.
It doesn't make sense that girls aren't allowed to do farm work when girls can do anything a boy can do, and more.
And Marilla is basically telling her, no, that's not the way it's done. And Anne ends up crying herself to sleep. So, later that, after she get Anne situated in the room, she go back down to talk to Matthew, and Matthew clearly likes her. And Marilla ends up making some statement, well, what good is she to us? And he basically said that it shouldn't be about what good is she to us. It's like, what good can we do, for her? We could give her a loving home. We can give her a lot.
What good would she be to us?
We might be some good to her.
So the next day, she went over to speak with Mrs. Spencer, and basically said that there was a mistake and asked for a boy.
Matthew and I sent word for you to bring us a boy from the asylum. We told your brother Robert to tell you we wanted a boy.
Marilla Cuthbert, you don't say so.
And wouldn't you know, she had a neighbor, Mrs. Blewett, who had a bunch of kids who needed help. And so they go over to talk to Mrs. Blewett, and she basically, her nasty disposition, she, basically, you're going to do what I tell you or else.
If I take you, you'll do as I say and speak when spoken to. I don't suffer no back talk, and if I find you lacking, you'll know the toe of my boot.
And then she ends up telling Marilla, like, I can take her off your hands now.
Cuthbert, if you like, I can take her right now.
Well, I don't know.
But obviously Marilla had, that whole situation was somewhat distasteful. She really didn't care for that. She was like, let me talk to Matthew. And so she ends up taking Anne back home. And of course Matthew was happy to see her. And, he don't really care for Miss Blewett anyway.
Wouldn't give a dog I like to that Blewett woman.
She decided to keep Anne on a trial basis. So Rachel comes over the next day. And basically reiterating her objections to them adopting. And Marilla basically said, well, we're only keeping her for a trial. We're going to keep her for a week or so to see what happens. So Anne comes downstairs, and all of a sudden, Rachel's nasty behind starts talking about how she looked.
And did you ever see such freckles? And hair as red as carrots? Dear me.
And, she was going in on her. And so, of course, Anne got upset and basically told her that she hates her. And how would she like if people talked about the fact that she was fat and clumsy?
How would you like to have such things said about you? How would you like to be told that you're fat and clumsy?
And eventually Anne runs off. And so Rachel had the nerve to be upset, like, how dare this child talk to me like this? And Marilla ends up saying, well, you shouldn't have made fun of her.
You shouldn't have twitted her about her looks, Rachel.
And so Rachel was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to watch my mouth, basically not to offend this orphan that came from God knows where. Like, it was just so demeaning and disrespectful and rude, right?
I can see now I'm going to have to be very careful what I say after this. Since the fine feelings of orphans brought from goodness knows where have to be considered before anything else.
And Marilla's talking to Matthew about it. And he basically said that, Rachel need to be, she need to be told off sometimes. But, Marilla knew that eventually Anne was going to have to apologize to her. So, later that night, Matthew ended up going to her room and basically talking to her about, talking to her about the situation. And basically saying that sometimes you have to apologize even when you don't mean it, And so, the next morning, they go over to Rachel's house, and she put on this whole performance about how sorry she was.
Oh, Mrs. Lynn, I am so extremely sorry.
And eventually, Rachel apologized to her and basically said that I'm just outspoken. I don't mean any harm.
I guess I was a little hard on you. But I'm just an outspoken person. You mustn't mind me. That's what I said.
So, they get back to the house, and they have some dinner or something they're going to. And so she's doing Anne's hair, and Anne notices this beautiful brooch she has in her jewelry box. They go to the event, and this is where she meets her friend Diane. This is going to be her friend throughout the series. And they're talking, and they have something in common, like they really enjoy books.
I like to read when I can. I like reading too.
So later that night, they get to the house, and they're getting ready for bed. She realizes her brooch is missing. Of course, she goes into Anne's room and basically told her to confess, so she was going to send her back to the orphanage. Anne basically says, I didn't take the brooch. She sends Anne on to the station to have her sent back. While later that day, she was putting laundry away. She finds the brooch. It somehow fell in between the chairs. And she ends up having Matthew go to the station to get Anne, but it was too late. Anne was already on the train. So that's pretty much how this episode ends.